Citizens of Nindie Nation, welcome! Come one, come all, and gather around as we tell the tale of Nindies new, Nindies of old, and Nindies of incredible value. Bask in the light of roguelike elements and feel the warm glow of RPG mechanics abound. Join us for another week of Nindie Nation. Thanks for tuning in to the Nindie Nation podcast, your weekly dose of all things independently developed for the Nintendo Switch. I'm Jeff, and today on episode 37, we'll cover new Nindie releases on the Nintendo eShop for the week of September 13th through the 20th, 2019. If your eyes are jealous of your ears, well, you're in luck. You can also get this podcast complete with gameplay footage and trailers of the games we discuss on YouTube, usually a day or two after the audio portion of the podcast airs. While you're on the Nindie Nation YouTube channel, be sure to check out the Let's Play Nindie series, and coming soon, the 7 Nindies that have aged like a fine wine, a video which explores games with developers so dedicated they have added a significant amount of new content to keep their games lively for free, far beyond the game's original release. Keep tuned to our Twitter feed at Nindie Nation to be the first ones to know when these new videos publish, or just subscribe, click the little bell, and do all those things YouTubers tell you to do over at the Nindie Nation YouTube channel to get notified of new content automatically. If your love for Nintendo extends beyond just the Nindies, that's okay. Join the rest of the Nintendo Village group over at thenintendovillage.com, where you can read all about Nintendo news, new releases, deep dives into the classics, and a slew of other more niche podcast shows just like the Nindie Nation podcast. Be sure to follow them on Twitter at Village Nintendo. We thank the Nintendo Village for hosting Nindie Nation. Now that Nindie class is in session for the week, kids, it's time to look at the tardy list. So before we talk about your fellow students new to the School of Nindie, let's talk about those which released without warning since last week's episode of the Nindie Nation podcast. Golzo is a fun pick-up-and-play soccer game, or football for the non-American listeners, developed by Purple Tree Studio. Borrowing from the simple arcade approach of games like NBA Jam or even Mario Strikers, Golzo brings a polished 2.5D presentation with bright colors, funny commentary, and hand-drawn graphics that are really striking. I've always thought soccer was the sport that best translated to video games, and this one is exactly the kind of sports game that appeals to someone like me. At $12.99, it is loaded with content and comes well-reviewed across the industry. This is a good one. Whitehorn Digital brought us a music-based platformer with a psychedelic neon visual style called Newt 1. In a refreshing change of pace, this $10 title rewards players for bringing more life into the world, rather than just taking it away. You'll run and jump and platform your way through levels inspired by mascot platformers of the 90s. I've got this one on my wish list, and I think I'm gonna see if I can convince my daughter to play it with me. It looks like a lot of fun. Finally, published by Spracklesoft and aiming to steal $5 out of your wallet, Yellow Fins is a shameless ripoff of the mobile classic Tiny Wings. You know, the one you slide up and down the hills trying to time the tap and release of the screen to give your little bird dude the most momentum possible every time you get up to the peak of the hill. It's a really fun classic game. I mean, it's like probably 10 years old now, but that's not what this is. It's a ripoff. So don't buy Yellow Fins, but totally go on your phone and download Tiny Wings and try it out. That's a great classic mobile game. And that's it for the tardy publishers of this past week. Let's blast off into new Nindie orbit and check out the new titles coming out to the eShop on September 13th through September 20th. Starting with Friday the 13th, we have Atomic Heist, a really fun game by Dragius Games that I've been playing quite a bit over the last week. It launches again on the 13th for $3.99, but it's regularly going to be $7.99. I think at the lower price, it's a pretty compelling title. It's a relatively generic twin-stick space shooter, but it has a ton of different weapon and attack types with a lot of RPG mechanics. It's really hard. Like, took me 15 tries to get through the first level, and the first level still takes probably 30 seconds, but now that I'm getting over that initial difficulty speed bump and I'm starting to equip more of the weapons and abilities that I like, I'm finding a game that's honestly pretty fun. Also on September 13th, Distraint Deluxe Edition is the next game by Radalaika Games and launches for $5.99. Distraint is a 2D psychological horror adventure game. You're a dude who breaks into this old lady's home and then I guess has a crisis of faith and humanity. It's told in this really super duper letterbox widescreen format with hardly any interface, which is all built to try to hold your attention and immerse the player. However, as you know, I don't do the spookies. If I did, even then I'm not sure that this would be one that's got much to write home about though. Chop is launching for 50% off at only $4.99 and is another Cubic Games title. This one is a super gory 2D party game, similar to Ultimate Chicken Horse, where you and other combatants are on a static 2D screen, basically attacking each other while trying to avoid crazy obstacles on the screen, like lasers and monsters and spinning saws and stuff like that. Ellen is another new release that I wish was all about simulating the life of Ellen DeGeneres, but unfortunately it is not. Instead, it is released by Jandusoft, a developer I've never been particularly fond of, and I don't think this game's gonna change my mind. It's another 2D psychological horror game, but unlike Distraint, this one looks to have a little more puzzle solving and traditional gameplay. Even at $8 though, it would have been better as an Ellen DeGeneres simulator. Or maybe Ellen Page. Really any Ellen besides this Ellen. Rest in Pieces by newcomer Itataki is quite the unique game. You swing a porcelain doll, think like a Christmas tree ornament, through these nightmarish scenarios, just like really freaky visuals, and your goal is to not break the porcelain doll thing. So I guess you call it a horror physics puzzler? It's $7.99, so it isn't too pricey, but I'm not gonna try it out. Releasing on September 17th, we have Akash, The Path of the Five. It is a visual novel by Truant Pixel, releasing for $30, and from everything I can see, it looks like the cover art from one of those grocery store romance novels that my mom used to read back in the early 90s, except all of the hunky dudes are elves and fairies. I will never understand why people are using their Switch as a device to help them, you know. Next, AI, The Somanum Files, is the newest release by Spike Chunsoft, who we haven't seen in quite some time, but I know them as the publisher behind the beloved Pixel Junk Monsters tower defense games, which are awesome. Unfortunately, this one is another visual novel where you're an investigator solving crimes in a futuristic anime Tokyo. Oh, and it's $54. Why are these visual novels always so expensive? They seem like they'd require the least amount of work to develop, I don't know. But I digress. This week, guys. Save us, somebody, from this tepid week of Nindies. Please, somebody. Oh, what's that? On September 17th, we're getting one of the best multiplayer games of all time. That's right, the Behemoth is finally bringing Castle Crashers Remastered to the Switch. And I'll tell you what, if you haven't played this, by all means, buy and play this game. It is one of the best arcade action brawlers ever released. Launching at a perfect $14.99, you'll get a ton of replay value out of this game. It's great if you play single player, but it is life-changing if you can play it with a friend, especially if you're playing together in the same room, because it also supports online play. It's funny, it looks like an Adult Swim cartoon, it has multiple characters with different play styles and abilities, and everyone has a basic RPG leveling system, which encourages you to play around with the different characters across multiple playthroughs. There's a couple of secret levels and bosses, There's mini games, and for completionists, there are some really worthwhile unlockables for doing everything in the game. Castle Crashers, if you can't tell, is amazing. If you've played it, you know it is amazing. And if you haven't played it, play it. In fact, if you have a friend or significant other who doesn't play games very often, but, will occasionally, this is the perfect game to get them in on. It's a little too violent, although it's cartoony. It's a little too bloody and kind of crude to let young kids play, but I can tell you that this game in particular is one that my wife holds very fondly, and often when I ask her to try a new game with me, one of her first questions is it like Castle Crashers? So please, get Castle Crashers. This is a awesome new addition to the Switch library. Then, also on the 17th, we get Jet Cave Adventure. Cave is spelled with a K for some reason. This comes to us by the hit or miss developer 7 Levels, who has brought us the pretty fun game Golf Peaks and the almost but not quite there Castle of Heart. Jet Cave Adventure, however, looks like it could be one of the better titles in their catalog. You're a caveman who has found a jetpack and other pieces of more futuristic technology, and you must platform your way through a stone fiction world with gameplay that is trying to be like Donkey Kong Country or maybe that new side-scrolling ukulele game. It's coming in hot at $17.99, which is a 10% discount, but it seems to pack a lot of content into the mix. So let's keep an eye on the reviews for this one, because I think Jet Cave Adventure could have hidden gem potential. Then, on September 19th, we get Lost Castle from another indie studio who brought us Sinner Sacrifice for Redemption just earlier this year. This is a 4-player dungeon crawling game for $8, regularly $10, and frankly, it looks like a poor man's Castle Crashers, almost to a shameless extent. That doesn't mean I'm mad at it though. With the addition of randomly generated levels and what looks like a lot more focus on looting and loadouts, I might pick this one up in the future, but they picked a really bad week to release a Castle Crashers like. I'm sorry, Lost Castle, but this week it's all about Castle Crashers. Then also on the 19th, we have the return of another fantastic old indie title with Puzzle Quest. The Legend Returns. Now, if you're a younger listener, you may not remember Puzzle Quest sweeping the DS back in 2006 when the system was still finding its bearings. Puzzle Quest is a match 3 style puzzle game, which is kind of like a lot more polished and much deeper version of something like Bejeweled, where the lines you clear actually become attacks in a traditional RPG. So you have to be really strategic about how and what you clear on the screen, depending on the types of attacks, abilities, or buffs or healing or whatever you use throughout the battles. As it is an RPG, there's skill trees and experience levels to grind, and a story that isn't half bad. The game is a very welcome return coming to us from D3 Go, which actually includes a good portion of the original Puzzle Quest team. If you have a daily commute that gives you Switch time, this would be perfect. The levels themselves aren't very short, but the game is very guilty of whisking away hours at a time for those of us who played it all those years ago. The asking price of $14.99 is certainly fair, as you've got easily a full RPG's worth of content, and by design, the game is infinitely replayable. So if you've got room in your gaming for a puzzle or an RPG, why not try out a puzzle RPG? Police Stories is a top-down shooter that is unique because, as a police officer, your goal is to not mow down the enemies, but rather use tactics and a little stealth to make arrests and interrogations whenever possible. From Hype Train Digital, $15 is a bit higher than other games in their library, like Standby or 12 is better than 6, and this one doesn't really seem to bring much else to the table except that arrest mechanic, and honestly, that looks a little shallow to me. For now, I'm gonna pass on this Hotline Miami looking copycat because we finally just got the real Hotline Miami, but I'll add this one to my wish list for a rainy day when it's like $6 or $7, and I would recommend you doing the same if this is up your alley. Coming in at $4.49 is a twin-stick shooter RPG hybrid by Too Awesome Studio called Inferno 2. The developer hasn't created anything too noteworthy, and even though this title's neon graphics and RPG mechanics are somewhat tempting to me, I think Inferno 2 is just in way too crowded of a room as a twin-stick shooter to stand out. From new Nindie developer Chili Room is Soul Knight, hitting the eShop for $11.99. While I'm excited to see a new Nindie developer come onto the scene, this is yet another top-down twin-stick shooter with dungeon crawler mechanics. You might not believe me when I say this, but it includes the Nindie trifecta of procedurally generated levels with roguelike mechanics and RPG elements. It might be worth considering, but we've had enough of these titles this week to last us a year, and Soul Knight just seems to be a little too generic to stand out in this crowded genre. One Way Ticket by Zodiac Interactive is this week's anime visual novel about Japanese schoolgirls. I'm not seeing any bathing mini-games like last week, but this one only costs $7, so maybe those are just premium features that you have to shell out for. And in what is probably my biggest surprise of the week, coming to us from publisher Finji, who also published the beloved Night in the Woods and the recently released and highly acclaimed Wilmot's Warehouse, is Overland, a turn-based survival game where, quote, not everyone is going to make it. As a group of travelers trying to make it to the other side of the country during the apocalypse, you have to scavenge what you can find from gas stations and ward off looters in an old-school grid-based combat system and plan out basically like an Oregon Trail across the post-apocalyptic wasteland in a really neat, low-poly diorama visual style. And I'm totally feeling this game. Even with the asking price of $25, this is one I'd really like to try out. Now, I was excited to see Castle Crashers, and I was excited to see Puzzle Quest. Both of those are a little older, so you can only get too excited about re-releases. As far as new releases go, I was pretty excited by Overland. This one looks really neat, but the big one, saving the best for last, ladies and gentlemen, is Sayonara Wild Hearts by Samogo for $13. I'm going to show a little bit of footage on the screen, and if you haven't seen a ton of this game and you like what you see in a trailer, I would suggest not looking up more online because this really looks like an awesome title and I'm very excited to play it, but I'm gonna guess that it's a little short. It's basically a rhythm game. If you're a DS owner and you've ever played Elite Beat Agents, I get a lot of vibes from that. It blends a couple of different styles of games. Sometimes you're a top-down like driving game trying to collect things. Sometimes it's playing out like a rail shooter. Sometimes it's playing out like a hand-to-hand combat, but it's basically telling a really cool story along with an original soundtrack. So think of it as like an original indie soundtrack, an original indie game, and they go hand in hand so that you can play out this, I almost want to say a graphic novel, but it looks like it has tons of score chasing modes, and I really have seen nothing else like this. I've seen pieces of it in different places, but I am very excited for Sayonara Wild Hearts by Samogo, and it's only releasing for $13, and I think that is a phenomenal way to close out the week of new Nindie releases. That wraps up this week's new releases on the eShop. Not quite the big bang week that we've been seeing earlier in the year, but still a better week than last week, with two classic indies making their way to the Switch and Sayonara Wild Hearts coming out next week. Man, that game has been one of my most anticipated titles since its original announcement back at the Game Awards in December. What are you picking up this week? Are you one of those few people that haven't played Castle Crashers and you're gonna dive in for the first time? If so, let me know know on Twitter at Nindie Nation. I would love to hear initial impressions from people new to the game 14 years after its original release. And let's all gush about Sayonara Wild Hearts together next week when it releases. But if new games aren't your thing and you're just looking to save a few bucks this week, you're in luck. There are currently 158 games on sale on the eShop, with 126 of those sales brand new this week. And that's way too much for you to dig through, so I did the work for you and found a few that are worth your hard-earned digital dollar. So let's check out some of the best games on sale this week. As an aside, I'm not sure if this counts, but a small, possibly independent studio called Flying Tiger Entertainment, or FTE Games, has been porting classic Data East arcade games that were originally released in the late 80s or early 90s over to the Switch under the name Johnny Turbo's Arcade, and they've been doing this since the Switch's launch back in 2017. If you've ever seen them, the titles are typically $7 or $8 and are actually very faithful ports, frequently including multiple regions or versions of the game, a bunch of added features to modernize them, and other nostalgic goodies alongside a fantastic port of the original game itself. I usually don't talk about them because they're not exactly independent, and the original titles were from a now defunct major publisher, but this week all of their games are half off on the Switch, and there's a few that I'm a big fan of. You can search on the eShop for Johnny Turbo. Obviously the games are all in the Great Deals tab on the eShop, or here's a few of the games that I think are worth checking out. The Joe and Mac series, including the sequel Caveman Ninja, Bad Dudes, Breakthrough, Super Burger Time, and Heavy Barrel are a few of my favorites, and they're all $3 or $4 right now, so pick up a couple of them and educate yourself on some classic arcade games. It'll be good for you. It's like eating your vegetables. Now, the big title on sale this week is the incredible Celeste, alongside the brand new and free Chapter 9 DLC, which adds about 20% more content to the end of the game. The game itself is half off for $10, which is the lowest price it's ever been. Every Switch owner should play Celeste. It is probably, in my opinion, the most perfect or closest to perfect video game I have ever played. I don't think it could have done anything better in its quest to tell a moving story about a girl battling her inner demons as she climbs up a mountain. The gameplay is 2D platforming that's tough as nails, but every room and level can be beaten, and if you struggle, the game has a truly innovative mechanic for helping you get through some of the harder rooms so that anyone can see the game to its completion. Please, do not sleep on Celeste. Now is the time to buy it if you haven't. Also on sale is Guns, Gore, and Cannoli for $5.99, which is 40% off. It's a fun side-scrolling action arcade shooter for up to 4 players about a mob enforcer in the Roaring 20s, a timeline that I just love seeing explored. It has gorgeous hand-drawn artwork and hilarious storylines with great voice acting alongside it. It's a great title at $6, and the fairly new sequel is 33% off for $8.79. And the game that is always on sale and has been a long-running joke on Nindie Nation since the very beginning, 9 Parchments is once again on sale for its usual 70% off for $5.99. I have heard that as long as you have someone to play this game with, the top-down twin-stick action RPG can actually be a lot of fun. As I don't have someone who I think would play through the game with me, I have yet to buy it, but there is a free demo and you can try it for yourself, and I had fun with the demo. It also has online play, so if you have someone that you think will play through it with you, but they don't live near you, that's an option as well. And finally, your cheap title for the week, Glaive, or Glaive? Brick Breaker is 99 cents, which is 90% off. And look, if you like Breakout, Arkanoid, or whatever you call the game with blocks at the top of the screen where you bounce a ball and try not to let it get past your paddle at the bottom of the screen, I would love seeing people use that as the actual title. Anyways, this is a great way to get some of that action on your Switch for the cheap. You'll get $1 worth out of it for sure. This week, as you can tell, is a little slim pickings on the eShop for good deals. I just only want to bring you games that have a significant discount or are absolutely worth your time. There are a bunch of Ratalaika and Dragius games on sale for 30-40% off. If there was one for a really steep discount, I would really recommend it, but nothing else really stood out that I'd want to stake the Nindie Nation brand on. But let me know if you find anything else that's absolutely worth it. And as always, when midweek deals pop up, I like to share them on Twitter at Nindie Nation, so you can keep following us there for any kind of last-minute deals. Citizens, thank you for joining us as always. Let's keep the conversation going on Twitter at Nindie Nation. You can chat with me directly at Nindie Jeff. And don't forget to check us out on YouTube, where you can see videos of every game that we've talked about today, or most of them, as well as our Let's Play Nindie series, which dives into some of the more surprising or unique games, as well as some of the terrible games that I end up falling in love with, like Vertical Drop Heroes or Dungeon Stars. Let me know what other games you'd like to see a Let's Play Nindies of, and maybe I'll do a video on them. Also coming up very soon is the 7 Nindies that have aged like a fine wine video, which I still don't know what I'm gonna call it, but you'll be the first to know. And as always, we are brought to you by the Nintendo Village, a group of content creators dedicated to their love for all things Nintendo. On their YouTube channel or at thenintendovillage.com, you can see reviews and articles about all kinds of Nintendo games, and they have a ton of fantastic podcasts just like the Nindie Nation, like Mouse Bites, which focuses on Disney titles, or Nintendo Nostalgia, focused on wonderful Nintendo titles of yesteryear. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I always love our time together. Leave us a comment, drop us a note, keep the conversation going, and we'll see you next week for another Nindie Nation podcast. Until then, citizens, keep those Joy-Cons synced.